Hi there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. I'm your host, Adam Shawwalker, and today we're going to be taking a look at this new horror album, Skin. This is the second full-length studio album from Horror after a long string of singles, EPs, and various collaborations. We get this new album, one that I'm not entirely sure I was looking forward to. I really enjoyed their debut album, The United States of Horror. At the time of its release, it was scratching the itch that City Morgue, JPEG Mafia, Clipping, Death Grips had given me during that window of my life. And while I can say I do still enjoy most of those bands to a certain degree, most of them have at least developed their sound in a way that I can still listen to them and not feel like I've been stuck in some kind of time bubble in 2017. That's not to say that Horror have done a bad job here, but you can really tell that just after the release of their debut album and those collaborations they did with Three Teeth that they haven't really ventured too much further into anything experimental. So they found this sound and it seems like they've glued themselves uncomfortably to this rap punk horrorcore industrial hip-hop sound. What used to be a perfect fit is now becoming a worn-out trope. There are some elements that I like that they've adopted into their sound a bit, but ultimately everything new that they've brought to the table is some very basic harsh noise work and frankly played out City Morgue meets Heavy Metal King's chic. From the first moment of the first track on this album, I am reminded that there are so many elements of so many things that I like, all mixed in a frustrating way that lacks any kind of cohesion or flow. A lot of the tracks here are almost composition-like with how patched together some of these ideas are. And this problem extends well into the album, pretty much all over this album actually, even on the better songs. Like right after this on Battery Not Included, it feels like they're trying to make up for the song's drawbacks with overblown breakbeat samples and vocal performances that would be excellent if they weren't very clearly covering up the lack of content in this track. On this next track, Bite My Face, there's a Corey Taylor feature, which is fine, I guess. He does bring a ton of energy to the song and clearly isn't phoning in his performance or anything, but like, if Corey Taylor is going to be the one to bail you out on your own album, it's kind of disappointing. With that being said though, this is one of the more solid songs here, mostly because it seems like they structured this song around his performance. Slow Bread is another step in the right direction with a bit more reach for these guys. This song is a lot slower and a lot more concise. It is weird though that this ended up being the longest song on the album among the many differences this song holds compared to the rest of the album. It's like this song was kind of an afterthought that was dropped into the track listing. It doesn't really add or feel like it fits with any of the flow on this album. And I think they made a decent effort with the placement here for pacing reasons, but it's so far removed from the rest of the material that it's hard to understand why it was included here. Also, the feature on this song is pretty underwhelming. These lines aren't really like bad or laughable or anything like that, but there's really just nothing going for this feature. It's a forgettable track. Protect My Bitch Part 2 pretty much has the same function as Battery Not Included. Loud, blown out production, lazy sampling, half-delivered lyrics that sound unfinished. At least with some of their older material, it felt like there was a point to listening to these songs, but this album just feels like it is guilty of throwing whatever on this track listing to reach the minimum quota of what it seems to be like 12 tracks here, when maybe like half of this material seems like it's ready to go. Among the songs that feel finished on this album is Speak of the Devil, which still has some pretty lukewarm performances from whichever one of these guys is doing this barely contained screaming parts, but other than that, this track feels way more fleshed out than most of these songs. Skinhead featuring Saul Williams continues this upward trend for a song that at least delivers on the punk side of things with a great trade-off between these super loud angry parts and calm lo-fi rap sections. Though this song still feels like it could have been set aside for a different project, the heavy punk parts, while fitting in with the rest of the album, feel very shoehorned into this track. I mean, they've got these really great calm segments that they kind of just let slip here when I would have far preferred to see these styles like fully explored and fleshed out. Like these calmer segments are really, to me, the more promising part of the track. Like, why would you layer over this kind of like caked on, almost makeup-like thing over what I find to be a really interesting, really compelling listen, and then it's just kind of ruined with these like big shouty segments that are really not all that great. Lower Than Scum is a short, almost grindcore-like interlude that could have been something potentially potentially very cool had it actually been a proper length song. I'm sure you guys are sensing a trend here. Anyway, Devil at the Crossroads is another of these sonic left hooks. The sound that this song has is so fresh compared to the rest of the songs here. The beat flows, there's no upstream change up for some mediocre horrorcore part that's just wedged in here. In fact, the closest they get at the end of this song is reined in so deliberately. This is probably the most cohesive song on this entire album. Kind of like a weird thing to put this far into the record. The world, the flesh, the devil immediately drops back into the expected and frankly the disappointing sound that is most of this album. I think over the course of this album I've been really thinking that I don't necessarily hate the instrumentals for a lot of the stuff on this record, nor do I hate the vocal work, but at so many points on this album those two elements clash so violently when they should ideally be working together perfectly, and if you were to put them apart it would seem like they would fit together. I don't even know what to say about the song Limits. This track reminds me of a song that was released 5 years ago from maybe like City Morgue or something during like the dawn of this hardcore hip-hop thing. It's so run-of-the-mill as to be completely redundant. Dead or Asleep is kind of a decent send-off for this album with a few more segments that are pretty fresh as far as the style goes, but nothing here goes far enough creatively to make any kind of statement. So what we've got is a collection of tracks that mostly pussyfoots around new ideas and stays rooted in old ideas that are never really as good as their original concepts. Horror have really found a sound over the past few years that has unfortunately cost them their identity. When United States of Horror released in 2017, there was a sound that, while similar to this new wave of hardcore hip-hop, was entirely distinguishable from the crowd. And now what we have is this homogenized version of what used to be a really top-notch, really great hip-hop act. I love the concepts that have been tapped here for this album, but this is probably the strongest example I have seen in recent memory of overreaching and trying to cover every base. Skin is a very unfortunate too. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of the album in the comments below, and if you liked this video, please drop a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps out a lot. And finally, if you'd like to help me out further, maybe check out my Reverb store or my Instagram. The links to those are in the description below. Thank you all so much again. We'll see you on the flip side.